welcome to another wargame review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander, and today we're taking a look at an older wargame. This is Afrika from The Gamers. Now, this is part of the Standard Combat Series, or SCS series. It was, basically, that whole series was designed by Dean Essig. This one's from 1993, and most of them, and that whole line is now produced by Multiman Publishing, MMP. So MMP's releasing new SCS titles. They actually have a new North Africa one that's much bigger in scale. But this is I think the second game in the SCS series, and it's a North Africa game. It's a map and a half, and a two-player hex encounter war game covering basically late 1940 all the way through the end of 1942. So you have the early Italian campaign kind of tailing off, and then Rommel shows up, and then it's kind of the entire campaign is played out in this one. So I got this. Oh gosh, I think I just bought it secondhand for like $20. This, because it's old and it was also very prevalent at the time, there's a lot of copies of this kicking around. So you can pick it up very cheaply. There is a new version of it. I think it's still called Afrika. It's kind of it's Afrika 2nd Edition, or Afrika 2, people call it colloquially. Apparently it's really, 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 really good. But it's also out of print, and it's over $100, which it's too rich for my blood. So I thought, let me pick up one of these old ones with the old rules. It's got the 1.5 series rules that come with it. And see what it's like. So this was kind of both an experiment in, does the SCS system hold up, basically, the further back in time you go, and also, if you're not willing to fork out all that money for the new version of it, is the old version worth it, or is it playable? So I played this solitaire, and I played the Rommel campaign, so it starts at turn 8 and goes all the way through turn 28. So, we got through probably about half of the game before the Axis forces basically were completely destroyed and collapsed, and the game was over. The reality is there was no way for them to win or do anything, frankly, all that interesting. So that was a mixture of supply, which is an extremely important component of this game, and extremely poor dice rolling from their standpoint, and a couple of tactical blunders here or there, but the Allies played a very good game in this one. So with SCS, the only other one that we've have played was Rostov 41, which uses like the new, I don't know if it's like a 1.8, like it's the newest one that's been released. So we played that. That was our first time with that. It was really, really good. Their Standard Combat Series is very rules light, honestly. I think the series rules in this one are like 5-6 pages, 8 pages at most. And then you get the game-specific rules, which for this one was slightly more. This one probably has 4 or 5 pages of game rules, because there's like a whole extra thing of supply and ports and stuff. But Rostov was like 1.5 pages of game rules. It's such an easy system to learn. It is, and it depends which title you get. This one, Rostov was the same way, comparatively pretty low counter density. You can get some stacks of units, but you don't have, the game just doesn't have that many units. I think this had like a single sheet of counters. Maybe a sheet and a half, but I'm pretty sure it was just one sheet of counters. So you're getting yourself into a system that is easy to learn and not massively overwhelming, which I really appreciate. If you watch our Rostov 41 review, that was a big hit with us, and it tantalized me to play more of these. Since then, I bought up a whole bunch of SCS games. This is one of them. So I kind of wanted to check this out. Also, North Africa to me is a very interesting campaign. The flow of the thing can sometimes be a slightly predictable. One side will have the upper hand with a good supply, then kind of push forward, and then that's going to peter out, and that's going to push back. So you get some of those ebbs and flows, but I don't know. I just, to me, the whole North Africa campaign, historically speaking, is very, very interesting. I love reading about it and watching documentaries. It's just an interesting conflict. So this particular title, first off, I used the... let me just double check. I used the 1.5 rules that like came with this old box from 1993. Like it still has like a fax number that you can use to get in contact with the gamers. So like that's it. So someone had asked me, "Oh, can you use like the 1.8 rules or the newest set of rules?" Absolutely, you can. There's no reason you can't do that, because any of the stuff that's specific to this is in the game rules, and the rules for the series basically haven't changed that much since 1993. They really haven't. The new sets of rules, it's more of like some clarifications, reorganizing them, and then, making them, they're like in full color now and all that kind of stuff with examples of counters and play and stuff like that. So there's no reason you couldn't get your new rules and play that with this. You could absolutely do that. But I played with the old rules from 1993. No big deal. Really easy to read and learn still. Almost didn't have to reference anything because I've played one of these before and the rules are the same. So from that standpoint, there's no reason that you couldn't kind of play this one how you want to. There's also, in this one, as in all the SCS games, you're not allowed to inspect enemy stacks. You can see the top counter on them, but you're not allowed to expect. But that's the only level of like hidden information, which is great because I played this solitaire, no big deal. So that's also to me is very easy to play this solo, push the counters around, no big deal. You're not allowed to inspect the opposite stacks on your turn. Well, guess what? I don't remember what on earth was in there anyway. So it's not that big a deal. So that was also very manageable. So the big thing with this one is something that people said like, oh, I had trouble with the supply and the supply was kind of fiddly. It's not. It's really not. The supply rules in this one, let's see, for Afrika, the supply rules are like this. These are the supply rules. But the reality is what it boils down to is you're given a number of supply points, and those supply points are used to feed your units. And you just have to move them up the board with your truck points that you're assigned each turn, and then get them into range so that they can use up the supply. It's not that complicated. It's really, really not. I did not and because the counter density is so low, I'm pushing around 15 to 20 units, most of which are stacked together half the time anyway, and then I'm moving around, one big stack of supply or maybe like one other small stack, and that's it. Like, it's because the game itself is not complicated, the addition of the extra layer of supply didn't feel like it was overwhelming. And that is something that is new, or not new, but that's kind of unique to this one. If you play any of the other titles, things like Rostov 41, for example, they don't have these supply points and supply dumps to move around. You just got to trace back to a supply, boom, and it's really easy. Like, it's almost something you almost don't have to think about it, because as long as you're not getting surrounded, you're probably going to be fine. But in this one, you do have this extra little layer, and it makes it feel very North Africa. If you don't have a constant supply of your supply points, your attacks will peter out, you will all get out of supply, and you will start to have desertions, attrition, your units will be extremely weak, both attack and defense, and you're probably actually going to want to start pulling them back and retreating. And how many games do you ever play where you are voluntarily retreating in such a significant scale? I don't know. I feel like it's not that many. At least in one where it's like a whole campaign. Sometimes you're playing a rearguard game where like one side is definitely doing a rearguard action. That's like the whole point of the game. In this one, it's like, I'm charging up. I charged too far. Oh, let me withdraw myself a little bit. I'll cede a little bit of ground to get myself back into supply, so that then we can push forward again. It just feels really good to play with that in this game. Keeping your supply up's really important. There's a little interplay, especially with the Axis side, between their available shipping points, how many boats they actually have, versus the ports that they control and the port's capacity for that particular turn. And if you have lots of boats, but your ports are jam-packed and their capacity's low, you can't utilize all your boats. Or conversely, oh, we repaired all of my ports, I've got really strong port capacity, but I only have like one boat available. Your capacity to ship supply, which is really, really handy, becomes limited either way. If you roll really well on both of those, you can ship a bunch of supply in. That can be a huge boon. And the Allies have a similar type of thing. Theirs is slightly more stable, though. They don't have a limited amount of boats, so they're only limited by their port capacity, basically. But I really enjoyed that supply exercise within this SCS system. And like I said, it's because the balance between the combat units and the campaigning that you're doing and the supply, they're both, frankly, quite simple. So putting them together, I've got something that's like nice to play with, but it isn't just like, I'm not like, I'm getting bogged down. Here's my supply phase. Got to figure out all this stuff. Everything's really fiddly and tricky. I think the balance of these is really, really nice. SCS is really nice anyway, because normally supply is not quite an afterthought, but it's something that's very easy to consider and take care of. This one, it's an extra little bit of stuff to think about. And that was fun as well. Much more than that, and maybe it would have been too much, but I didn't have a problem with this for what it is. Now, making it work properly can be challenging, because the Italians just suck up so much of the supply, because they're much, much less efficient, and they got to have their pasta and wine. But making the supply work is half the fun of the game, and doing that effectively means there's a lot of tension in this one. You know, you're bringing up your little 2 supply points, and then you're like, I've got nothing next turn. So it's like, hopefully you can get more up there and keep it going. And it's constantly this thing that you're having to think about, which is fun. And on top of that, what that means is that then when you have the little long-range desert group counter that comes out, that can basically strike anywhere on the map in reality, you then have to like keep units back from the front to guard your supply depots that are moving, or you're risking them just being deleted, basically, or being slowed down, and them being slowed down and displaced can make a huge difference based on how many hexes you need this stuff to move next turn. So there's some very, very nice little Kroby interplay between some of those things as well also. What I'll do is I'll kind of show you how some of this works if you've not seen SCS or this particular title, and then we'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So here's a look at least a portion of the map. The map's much bigger than this, but I wanted to kind of zoom in, because there's a lot of map that you're not using at all times, so we've got a concentration of forces here. Now, if you ever played SCS, you'll be very familiar with how the system works. It's a very, very simple system. They've got the sequence of play printed on the map just up here that you can't see, but basically this game has a little bit of a kind of a initialization phase is what they call it, which that's some of the nuances to it. So you're going to roll for things like the amount of coastal shipping points that the Axis player has. And I'll try and move this over a little bit just so you can kind of see. So we have our Axis coastal shipping. You roll a d6, and depending on the result, that's how many points of boats that you have to ship units from Tripoli into the ports that you control, basically. But then you also have to roll your port capacity, roll a d6. So you might have 4 boats that you can use. But if the port capacity of Benghazi is only rolled as a 2, only 2 of those boats can go into Benghazi. Now, 2 of them could go into Tobruk if you controlled Tobruk and you rolled on that table, but you're limited by, you'll roll both of those, and one of them's going to be a limiting reagent, so to speak. And as such, if you roll really poorly, like if you keep rolling 1s, the supply gets really hairy. You want to roll high on both, or like the same number on both, so that you can move a good chunk from here to here, basically. So that's one of the things that you're going to do in that phase, is roll all of those. You roll for all of the different ports as well. You get a set number of air points, a set number of truck points, because you're going to use the trucks to move the supply. Your air points are used as barrage points, or the Axis can commit a bunch to help get more supply onto the table. So that's because the allies have a set number of supply that comes in. Every turn they're going to get 3 or 4, basically. It's a schedule. But the Axis are going to roll 2d6 on their supply table. And, of course, I rolled a 4. A 4 gives you, on their supply table, a 4 or less gives you 2 supply points. Now, if you had committed a bunch of your air points to suppressing Malta, what that does is it means that your supply convoys, it's easier to cross the Med, basically. So you would get a modifier to this. Anywhere from like 1 to, or +1 to +5, depending on how many of your air points you commit. So if you commit a whole bunch, you could get up to a +5 on this. Now, you're not going to have any air power for barrages or attacks and things like that. So it's a decision you got to make like first thing in the game. So let's say I had a +5 to this. I'm now a 9, and a 9 would give me 4 supply points. So it's 2 supply points more than what I rolled. So those supply points, you get a little counter for those. Let's say I had gotten 4. You get my little 4 counter, and that just goes into the little Tripoli holding box. And oh, that's just off map. We can't see that. And basically, there's an off-map holding box where that goes, and you've got to move them across Tripoli, and then, which is again off-map. Here, let's see that. There's these little holding boxes here. So it goes into this Tripoli holding box. Then you have to spend like all your movement to get into this box, and then after that you can move along here. So this is just kind of like this is all of the map of Algeria that you're not seeing printed, and it's abstracted in those 2 little boxes. So now I've got some supply. You're then going to roll for some replacement points. Roll 2d6. I rolled a 9. That's actually really good. So on 9 through 10, I get 2 steps of replacements. Replacements are used to add guys. You have to be in supply and not in an enemy zone of control. So all your guys that are engaged, no good. This dude back here, he can remove this step loss, which is awesome. So I've got 1 step there and 1 step there that I replaced. Good job. And the allies, the Commonwealth forces, are going to be doing the same thing. And then basically it goes to the player turns. You're going to roll 2d6 to see if Rommel runs away. Fantastic. He runs away on 2d6 on a 1 through 4. So he would actually run away. He's not running away. He's recalled to Berlin to do a bunch of his, Nazi headquarters stuff that he's got going on. So if he was on the map, he would get removed and he would get put onto the turn track next month. That's actually what's happened here. He's already on the turn track from the game that I just played. But then you go into the turns. So it's the Axis forces go first in the campaign, and they're going to do all their moves. Then they're going to do all their combats, and if they've got any exploitation moves, they're going to do those. Then you check supply afterwards, and that's really important. And then it flips to the Allied turn. They're going to do those same things. That's basically all a turn is. So when you move, you're going to move all of your units. Actually, we'll keep this over here because this is really important. So units move based on their movement value. Let's have a look at our little guy in Benghazi. He's a green. He's a little Italian dude. So he has an 8 movement factor. And just like you would expect, moving through regular terrain is like 1 movement point. Moving on roads. So these minor roads cost 1 movement point. Moving on these major roads, this red and white dotted line that goes across the whole of North Africa, those are half a point. So you can move 16 spaces on that road, or you can kind of move 8 spaces down here. But you basically do all your moves, and in this one you have to spend extra points to move into enemy zones of control. So let's say I've got this dude over here, and I want to go and attack him. Well, I've got 8 movement points. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I have to pay 1 to get in, 5, and then 6, 7, because it's a zone of control. I've got 8, I can do that. But if I'm 2 spaces further away, I now don't have the movement points to get in there, so I can only move this far. I can't do that attack. You have to be adjacent to someone to be able to attack them. So these slower infantry units, really, really painful to use at times. These really fast motorized units, you can use them a lot more. They can go further to catch up with other units, but also, you know, if you're close up, you're worrying less about zones of control. You just charge right on in there. You've definitely got enough points to get in there and do stuff. So that's all your moves. You do all your moves. Then you're doing barrages and combats. Barrages, you're going to add up your artillery points. So do I even have any on the board? The Axis got hammered in this one. So I've got 3 artillery points. It's this little bracketed 3. You're going to drop 3 points on him. They have a range of only 2 because of the scale of this thing. So you just roll your dice on your... there's a barrage table just off map. 2d6. I rolled a 7. And then on a 3 or less, you have to roll a 9 or more to do anything. You would do a step loss if you had hit. So this is where if you had any air points left that you hadn't committed to doing other things, you can toss in an air point. That costs 5. Or it's worth 5 barrage points. So this is now if this was an 8 and I rolled this, you have to obviously commit before. 8 and I rolled a 7. On that chart, a 7 is a hit and does do a step loss. So you would just simply do a step loss to them. That's barrages. Then you do all the combats. So you're going to soften everyone up, then you're going to do combats. Combats is quite simply an odds-based ratio. So it's kind of standard of what you would expect. So my attack factor's on the left. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This guy only has 2 factors because his attack and defense are the same, and it's the same on both sides. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 attack points. And the attack in this stack is a nightmare. I've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 6 on a 10, with the rounding, we're looking at 1-to-1, basically. And why this is important is because you're not allowed to inspect enemy stacks in this game. You can see the top counter of every stack, but you can't inspect anything below that until you've committed to an attack. Once you've committed, you can't pull out once you see that. So even playing solo, I have a hard time remembering the actual strength of stacks. So I don't know. I didn't have a problem with that. Roll 2d6 on the odds based. Oh, that's incredible. I rolled a 12. 12 on the 1-to-1 is defender takes 3 step losses and retreats 3. So 3 step losses. He's a step loss. 1, 2. Oh gosh, that's really ugly. 3 step losses. They were all dead because I only had 1 left. This guy's got 1 step loss, so he's going to have to retreat 3 spaces. 1, 2, 3. Done. You have to retreat towards a supply dump, and hopefully you're retreating and like trying to avoid zones of control, which make you take more losses. But that's attacks. It's not complicated, so you can move through it very quickly because this is a pretty low counter density game as well. Then, when you end up, after you've done all that, you've got to supply your units. Hopefully, you've brought supply on. Now, supply you're supposed to move in your movement phase, and you have these truck points, and the truck points are assigned based on a chart of which turn it is. So let's say I've got 5 truck points. Well, I got 4 points of supply in here. We can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. That's because these have a movement point of 10 when you're using a truck. And so you can move 20 spaces on that road. So now what I'm going to do is everyone who's on the board is going to trace supply back to this. And in doing so, they're going to spend points. So each of these points, each one of these supply points can support 10 units. And the amount of steps in the unit or the strength of the unit doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is if they're Italian or not. So Italians cost 3 supply points to keep them in supply. Germans and all the Commonwealth forces, just 1. So right now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And because of the rounding in this game, you divide that by 10, it's 1.2 counters. 1.2 gets rounded down to 1. So I'm only going to spend 1 to get all these guys into supply and keep doing supply. Now, if I've got another big fat stack of Italians, 3, 6, 9, 12, 18, or 15, sorry. Now I've got 2.7, I've got to get rid of another one and another one, because that 2.7 is going to get rounded up to 3. So the Italians are a huge drain on your resources in this game. Now all of those 4 truck points I spent gone there. I have 5 truck points, I got 1 more. Now I've got these shipping points, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from a 4 to a 3, and I'm going to stick one in Benghazi. I'm going to use my last truck point to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 over here. And he's going to keep some of these guys in supply. And trucks are the only thing. Trucks and tracing supply is half movement on these minor roads. Normal movement is just 1 on all those minor roads. So that's another thing to bear in mind. Keeping guys in supply and keeping the supply flowing is a huge part of this game, without, frankly, feeling particularly clunky. You will feel it. It is extremely important, but honestly, I didn't think it's not obnoxious. I've played a lot of games where the supply is, like, pretty intense. Some might consider this intense. I found it, because it's low counter density, I didn't find it that trying, honestly. But that's really the course of the game. You do all of that, then it's the Allied turn. They can do all their moves, they're going to kind of move up all their supply, do any shipping that they might need to, they're going to do all of their barrages, they're going to do all their combats, and then you do exploitation moves. So any unit that has all of their factors with a yellow background on them like this, they get to move twice, if they're not engaged with enemy units. So these guys, there's no enemy units around them, you can move 20 movement points, and you can move another 20 movement points. And you can do overrun combats as part of that. So this is a very free-flowing game and system if you're not engaged with anyone at the time. And your threat range on some of these armor units, like 20 movement points, is really, really big. And the LRDG is 25. He can move 25. He can be in Alexandria, and he can get to, I think he can get to Beta Farm in 1 turn. I believe it's possible, because I think I did it once, with all of this northern coast road open, and then skipping down here. Like, that unit is really strong for going around nipping unprotected supply dumps. You just jump on them and capture them, basically. There's a little table you roll on, which will... Some get destroyed, some you just displace, some you get and capture them. That can be absolutely lethal as well. Catching people out of supply, but it's a very, very interesting game. And frankly, for $20, not bad. So what I'll do is I'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So that was a look at the map. It's an older style, but frankly, extremely clear and very playable. Now, I had a great time playing this. And I had an extra great time playing this because I had kind of low expectations in a way, but it was also like $20. You can get this thing for like $10-15 on the secondhand market. It's an extremely affordable game. Comes in a little 1-inch box, map sheet and a half, single counter sheet, series rules, and the game specific rules. No play aids. All of your charts and stuff are printed on the map in the dead space, which I appreciate as well. Really nice use of space. And the counter artwork is pretty standard, but it holds up. I don't have any issues with any of that. The step loss counters are an olive green, which kind of matched with the green of the Italians. That was the only thing where I'm like, I wish those were a different color. That's the only thing. Because you can kind of, when you're looking from the side of a stack of counters, you can basically assess what's in there. Oh, these are the orange ones. Those are Germans. These are the green ones. Those are Italians. One of those green ones was slightly darker green, but it's hard to see from the side, and it was a step loss counter. So I wish those were a different color, but that is the most nitpicky thing in the whole world. But I had a blast playing this. And when I say my expectations were low, what I mean by that is I knew this was an SCS game going into it, so I had an expectation of what this was going to be. I was probably going to enjoy it because I really like the system. But I didn't know if there was going to be major differences between this version of it, this kind of older version from the early 90s, compared to the newest ones, which we've played, that came out like 2020, I think it came out. Like, those two are, that's a lot of time between those, and how much is it different? Are the old rules written in that old Avalon Hill style that's extremely dense and kind of hard to reference? And the answer to that is no. The answer to that is absolutely not. These are, frankly, the series rules haven't changed in 25 odd years, and I'm not mad about it. they're great. It's really easy to use. Having played the newest one, I stepped into this extremely easy and extremely quickly, and the game was eminently playable, as I would expect. So I was kind of extra happy. I was kind of expecting, like, yeah, this was alright. Like, this was an SES game, but I had a blast playing it, and I'm extremely happily surprised at that I wasn't bogged down in kind of like any of the... I didn't have any of the old style stuff, where I'm like, ugh. Like, I'm still trying to read some of the older rule books, and it's so small, it's so dense, and it's not organized great, frankly, in my opinion. And that is my opinion. But this is not that. If I'm going to pay $15 or $20 for a North Africa game that I can play solo, this is a bargain, honestly. You know, if you were to play this 4 or 5 times, might there be reasons why they made a second edition? Sure. Do I care about that for the price that I pay for this game? No. If I played this again, the outcome would probably be entirely different. If I played it a third time, it would be different again. There's just different things you could try, some things that I learned. I would have different roles for access supply. The allies may... Because things were really tight. The game ended up being fairly one-sided, in that the Axis kind of got raffle stomped halfway through the game. But that was only possible because the Allies, the Commonwealth forces, were able to kind of hang on to Tobruk and were to be there. Like, they had like one extra turn that maybe they wouldn't have done if I'd have played my Axis hand a little bit better or had some better supply stuff going on. And so they were able to reinforce it, and then hang on, and then more forces were able to come in, and they were able to hang on. And every time they were hanging on, until this kind of tidal wave of reinforcements built up, and they were able to smash the Axis forces, who just could not make a breakthrough. They had terrible attack rolls, kept hurting themselves, kept having no supply. It was a nightmare for them. But this, you know, it's $20. It's an SCS game. If I had the opportunity to play the new version, I would play it, obviously, but it's kind of hard to get a hold of, and it's kind of expensive, and having played this, I kind of have that sated. I'm not desperate to get my hands on that like I was before, because this was very satisfying for what it is, especially. So, you know, if you're looking for something that's kind of cheap, like if I'm going to take a punt on a war game, it's going to be something from an established system, a topic that I find enjoyable, and something that I don't know, that hasn't just kind of fallen out. They've remastered this already, and so you remaster something that had some core merit to it, and I believe that this is that. I had a blast playing this, and it's another SCS game I can chalk up that I played. I had a great time. Go and watch the after action report that's posted. You can kind of see the flow of what the game was. At least for I think I played like 8 or 9 turns of it before the Axis just capitulated. And it's interesting to think about if that had happened in real life. The invasion of Sicily and Italy happened probably a year earlier. Rome's gonna fall earlier. I don't know. Who knows what would have happened if the outcome of this game had been what already happened. It would have been fascinating. So I had a blast playing Afrika from the gamers. You pick this up secondhand, no big deal. There's a bunch of them online. And basically this comes with a big old thumbs up from me because the system's excellent. I thought the supply rules were almost a perfect balance of giving you something extra, an extra very interesting layer to play with and to manage without being cumbersome. And that's always my worry. Like, I play a war game to do the war aspect of it. And if I'm playing a war game and it's 50% of like kind of crunchy, cumbersome supply rules where I'm like, yeah, this is a factor in war, but I'm like, every time I'm doing this, I'm not shooting someone. It's not as, I don't know. I just don't like it as much. It's just a personal taste thing. So, if it's both interesting, but also not kind of insanely dense, great. and it fits within this theme, it fits within this theatre very well. I'm glad I don't have to do it in the other SCS titles. It's kind of basically all right here in North Africa, where it makes sense, it feels right, at least, within the context of it being a game, that it feels appropriate to have that in here, and making it work, trying to grok that, subsystem was an enjoyable experience, on top of kind of your regular moving, barraging guys, doing your exploitation moves, getting to encircle people, overrun combats, all that good stuff that SCS offers you within an extremely short series of rules. So, appreciate you guys tuning in. This is Afrika from the Gamers. Check it out if you're interested. It's available secondhand. If you've played the second edition, let me know how that is. If you've played both, I really, really want to know what the major differences are, how they compare, and, what am I missing out? Having not played the second one, what am I missing out having only played this? So, appreciate you guys tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.